Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says it's time to engage in lawfare. Most of us, as UPSC civil service aspirants, would have listened to multiple news channels and their programs in reference to the international relations. We might have also watched Rajya Sabha TV. We might have also seen discussions on India's world as well. In all these programs, most of the panelists would be retired diplomats. These are the diplomats who would have represented India in multiple forums. We might also have military experts as well. We might also have academicians whose expertise is in international relations. But this article says that in most of these panels, and also when it comes to policy making in India, with reference to international law, the government may not have used expertise of lawyers in international relations. So basically, when we speak about international relations, an aspect of international relations is also international law. Most of the issues that we currently see in international relations, whether in terms of maritime security or in terms of terrorism or in terms of security issues, all of which deals with international law. So the panelists should also include lawyers who are expertise in international law, and the government at the same time, when it is making a policy, it should also include advocates who have expertise in international law, is what is this article all about. So the article goes on to say that in the past we have had some deficiencies and lacunae when it comes to complying with the rules of the international law. So going forward, India should employ international lawyers, says this article. When it comes to one of the important international law, we have the United Nations Charter. Article 1 of the United Nations Charter speaks about international peace and security. It speaks about developing friendly relations. It speaks about achieving international cooperation in solving international problems. And as part of international peace and security, a country would be able to suppress the acts of aggression, remove any threats to the peace as well. But India in the past has not made effective use of the international law, says this article. So the article here illustrates the same with the help of an example. Let's understand this with the help of example. We had the Pulwama terror attack. When was this? This happened in the year 2019. What happened? There was a terror attack that was carried on in Pulwama, where in the state of Jammu and Kashmir back then. A suicide bomber came very close to the CRPF personnel who were traveling, and this resulted in suicide bomber, and it killed as many as 40 CRPF personnel. So what does India do? India immediately had to respond. India had to prevent future course of terrorist activities. So what does India engage in? India engages in Balakot airstrikes. So Balakot airstrikes is a response of India to this Pulwama terror attack. The strike was carried out by Indian jets. It also targeted the terrorist organization Jaish-e-Mohammed. Immediately after targeting this terrorist organization, India's foreign secretary comes up with a response. He says that India took up this particular action called as non-military preemptive action. So India's response to this airstrike was called as non-military preemptive action. What is this non-military preemptive action? As the very name denotes, it can be broken down into three words. One is non-military, second happens to be preemptive, and third is the action. So this is an action plan initiated by India. It is non-military in nature. What do we mean by it? When it comes to aggression, it can be from a state actor or it can be from a non-state actor. Who is a state actor? It can be the military of that particular country. It can be the armed forces. It can be the military, navy, or the air force of a particular country, which is given permission by the country's government. That is the state actor. Then we also have the non-state actors. Who are the non-state actors? It can be the terrorist organization. So when we speak about non-military here, India clearly goes on to say that the emphasis is on Jaish-e-Mohammed, which happens to be a terrorist organization. We, the India, add an apprehension that they could strike India, so we are using preemptive. So preemptive basically means an unwanted act which could have been initiated by a terrorist organization, so we are stopping it. So the response of India to the Pulwama attacks came in the form of a description called as the non-military preemptive action. This is where the author goes on to say that India should not have described this attack on the terrorists as non-military preemptive action, but instead it should have invoked the right of self-defense as espoused under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Why does the author say so? That is because when we speak about United Nations Charter, it gives a particular country permission to stop an aggressive force, which means it can be a state actor, it can be a non-state actor. But when India is describing this attack as non-military preemptive action, this is not sanctioned under the international law. So when it comes to the international law, we have Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, where permission is given for another country to prevent aggression. But when it comes to non-military preemptive action, this is not described in laws, but this is just a doctrine according to American creation. It is not part of the customary international law. Since it is not part of international law, India should have ideally used Article 51 when describing this attack, says the author. Since non-military preemptive action is an American creation, it is not part of the customary international law, while Article 51 is part of international law. We should have used such description on the international forum, says the author. There is also a confusion that Article 51 would only be used for the state actors and could not be used for the non-state actors. This is once again a false assumption. That is because back in the year 2015, we had the Paris attacks. Immediately after the Paris attacks, we had France as a government which was able to impose penalties, which was able to penalize and even carry out swift airstrikes against the ISIS as well. Since France has used Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, in fact, there have been number of other countries like United States of America, Israel, Russia and Turkey who have also supported this very idea that it can be imposed on the non-state actors if the host country is not taking actions against the non-state actors. So in the present situation, the non-state actor is Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is placed in Pakistan. Since Pakistan did not take action, India had every right. So India should have ideally used Article 51 of the United Nations Charter and should not have used non-military preemptive action, is the first illustration. The second illustration the author speaks about is in reference to the most favored nation. After the Pulwama terror attack, India decided to suspend the most favored nation status that was given to Pakistan. Ideally, when India was revoking this particular status to Pakistan, it could have made use of Article 21 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. What does it speak about? It speaks about removing the most favored nation status to one of the countries. How does this happen? Let's say there is one of the country where we have security related issues. Let's say we are engaging in war with another country, or there is other emergency in the international relations. Taking Article 21 as the premise, India would also be able to revoke such a status to another country in terms of most favored nation. However, instead of making use of Article 21 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, India made use of Section 8 of A of 1 of the Customs Tariff Act of 1975 and imposed tariffs on Pakistan's product by about 200%. Ideally, during this entire proceedings, Pakistan could have even pulled India to the World Trade Organization dispute settlement if it had decided to do so. So India should have ideally made use of the word national security, should have made use of Article 21, but instead went by Section 8 of A of 1 of the Customs Tariff Act, which should not ideally have been done, says this article. The third illustration it speaks about is in reference to the Rohingya refugees. Who are these Rohingya refugees? These are the minorities where in Myanmar there was ethnic conflict in Myanmar, which resulted in these minorities moving to Bangladesh. They also had to move to India as well. But according to Intelligence Bureau and other establishments in India, these Rohingyas could become a security threat. But according to international standards, if there are people who are coming from a particular country where they are facing a maximum violence, such people should not have to be pushed back to their home country, and that is what is called as principle of non-refoulement. But India did not want to accept these people primarily because of the security threat. India did face the international criticism, but India went ahead and said that such a deportation is right because India is not part of the Refugee Convention. Ideally, India should not have used this particular term, that it is not part of Refugee Convention, but should have used a loophole in the principle of refoulement, which is about security threat. So India should have made use of the loophole in this particular principle, where national security is one of the exceptions to non-refoulement principle in the international refugee law. If India had to deport the Rohingyas on the basis of national security, all they had to do was develop a case and show it to the world that they are a security threat. Here once again, India did fail, says the author. The fourth illustration is in reference to Taliban. When it comes to Afghanistan, we had the democratic force which was in Afghanistan. Now we have Taliban which has taken over power in Afghanistan. In order to make sure the Taliban meant its words in the international organizations, what can India do? India can suspend Afghanistan from SARC, but it is not doing so. Why? Because India is not making use of the international laws. One of the important international law that we have is Article 6 of the United Nations Charter. What does it say? It allows the United Nations General Assembly to expel any country on the recommendations of the United Nations Security Council if that particular country has continuously violated the principles as reflected in the United Nations Charter. So a country which is not following the principles of United Nations Charter can be removed if permission is given by the United Nations Security Council. Now let's bring this corollary to the SARC. What happens? Every international organization, when it is formed, has its founding principles. When it comes to the international laws, these founding principles will have to be followed. But when it comes to SARC, there is no such suspension. So what can be done? A corollary can be drawn from Article 6 of the United Nations Charter. This has previously been supported by the International Court of Justice as well, since the original document of SARC does not speak about suspension or expulsion. We can make use of Article 6. A corollary can be drawn, and Taliban, since it is an anti-democratic force, it can be suspended from SARC, says this article. Previously, if you look at international laws, international lawyers have also said that if there is a particular country, if there is a particular rule which is anti-democratic, in such a case, such a party can be suspended. In the present situation, we have Taliban, which is anti-democratic. One such example is we have African Union, which had suspended Mali in the past because it was anti-democratic. And if there are countries where we see human right violations, such countries can also be suspended. One such example is Commonwealth of Nations suspending Fiji in the year 2009. Or if there is armed aggression in a particular country, such country can also be suspended from the international organizations. Since SARC does not have any rules and regulations about expulsion or suspension, what can we do? We can make use of international conventions. This is also supported by International Court of Justice. We have ample amount of examples as well. So in order to make sure the Taliban mends its ways, India can also suspend Afghanistan from SARC. So what do we understand from all of this? What we require is expertise in international law. But the good thing that we have done in the past is, with respect to Kulbhushan Jadhav case, we were able to explore multiple viewpoints, options with respect to Kulbhushan Jadhav case, because we had experts in the international law. So in the present situation, because there is marginal involvement of the international lawyers, because this particular area is understaffed, because this particular area is unexplored, and we have neglected international law, all of this will have to be taken into picture, and ultimately these international lawyers will also have to be part of India's foreign policy, is what is this article all about. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says a vital cog in Bongoigov's response to malnutrition. The article here is speaking about reducing the child malnutrition. We have one of the administrative districts called as Bongoigaon. This is one of the administrative districts in the state of Assam. It has about 1116 Anganwadis with a total of 63,041 children who are below the age group of 5. So what should be checked? Whether these children are malnourished or not, for which the World Health Organization guidelines were followed, and ultimately according to the survey it says that 2416 malnourished children, out of which 246 cases were of severe malnutrition and 2170 instances of moderate acute malnutrition. So what should we do? We should overcome this particular issue. These malnourished children should be provided with nourishment, they should be provided with nutrients, and one of the ways that we would be able to accomplish this is to admit them in the nutrition rehabilitation center. What is this nutrition rehabilitation center? This is a health facility where children with severe acute malnutrition are admitted. They are provided all the nourished food and they would be managed in this particular center. Then these children are identified according to the screening process by the medical officers, and ultimately they are provided all the important requirements to meet the nourishment for the children. And if they have to be admitted, they will also be provided the ambulance service. And when they are admitted to this nutrition rehabilitation center, if there are parents of the children, they are also given loss compensation as well. And at the same time, these people are also taken care by the nutrition rehabilitation center in that particular district. But what is the concern here? When it comes to this Bongoigaon, there were less number of beds in the nutrition rehabilitation center. They had only about 20 beds in this particular district. Added to this, when there are parents who have to take care of their children, go to the nutrition rehabilitation center, there will also be loss. How? They have to give up on their jobs. These might be daily wage workers, so there will be loss of wages as well. Yes, compensation is provided, but this compensation is very less for these parents. And at the same time, if parents come up to this nutrition rehabilitation center, there might also be siblings of this particular patient. So what would happen? They will also start suffering as well. After they are treated in this center, if they are sent back again, the same process of malnourishment can occur in all these children. So what the administration required was an innovative approach to understand why malnutrition persists in that particular district and how they can overcome the malnutrition. This is where they come up with one of the programs called as Project Sampurna. So Project Sampurna happens to be one of the innovative initiative programs undertaken by the Bongoigaon administration, where they wanted to address malnutrition among the children in that particular district so that this particular problem does not occur in the near future. As part of this Project Sampurna, milk packets and eggs were given to the children. Growth chart and diet checklist were assigned to the mothers, and the mothers had to follow these checklists in a strict manner. Added to this, every mother was also tagged with another buddy mother. What is this buddy mother? Buddy mothers are mothers of healthy children. So there are two mothers, one whose children are not healthy, then there are mothers whose children are healthy. So there is knowledge transmission from the mothers whose children are healthy to those mothers whose children are not healthy. So such buddy mothers mean that they were tagged with each other and all the knowledge transfer happened, and they also lived in a similar socio-economic background as well. So they could have discussions and all the knowledge transfer happens between the mothers. Added to this, one of the important things that also had to be taken into picture is the financial obligations. If these mothers had to take care of their children, take care of themselves, what they require is the financial independence. So these mothers were also made part of the self-help groups as well. As part of the self-help groups, they were provided number of jobs under the National Rural Livelihood Mission, and ultimately they became financially independent. Food fairs were also organized in that particular city. Awareness was given about what is the regular healthy pattern of diet, and ultimately Nutri gardens at all schools and Anganwadi Kendras, plantation drives were also undertaken as part of Project Sampurna. So with this particular execution, the project has resulted in reduction of malnutrition in children with barely minimal investment. Sampurna is also able to meet United Nations sustainable developmental goals as well, and at the same time it has been able to prevent at least 1200 children from becoming malnourished and has stood the test of time during this particular process. In spite of all these inputs, if they were not able to come out of malnourishment, what we have is treatment provided by doctors under Rashtriya Bala Swasthya Karyakram. So what is this program all about? This is one of the initiatives taken by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare as part of National Health Mission. Basically, they'll try and identify if there are defects at birth, diseases that a child is going through, any deficiencies when it comes to nutrition, and developmental delays, all of which will be taken into picture by the doctors, and requisite action plan will also be initiated as part of Rashtriya Bala Swasthya Karyakram. With this project becoming a successful one at the district level, we have the National Nutrition Mission and the state government which recognize this particular project under the innovation category. This article goes on to say that such a model can also be used in many other districts to ultimately prevent malnourishment in multiple districts in India. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is important from the preliminary examination point of view. It speaks about 2.1. It speaks about Sant Dhyaneshwar. It also speaks about Sant Tukaram. So let us understand what is important from the preliminary examination point of view. Sant Dhyaneshwar was a Marathi saint. He was a poet, philosopher and yogi of Nath Vaishnava school who lived in the 13th century. Dhyaneshwar's thoughts and his philosophy was based on Advaita Vedanta. What are the writings of Sant Dhyaneshwar? He had written a commentary on Bhagavad Gita which is called as Dhyaneshwari. He also wrote Amrutanubhav, which is nothing but immortal experience based on Upanishad philosophy, and Haripant, a hymn praising Hari. What are the teachings of Sant Dhyaneshwar? He emphasized teachings such as discovering spirituality within oneself. He prevented followers from depending on the texts, and at the same time he believed in single formless God as well. He adamantly opposed caste boundaries and felt that the only road to God was via bhakti. This can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. Then we also have Sant Tukaram Ji, who was a 17th century poet saint who was contemporary of Shivaji Maharaj, Eknath and Ramdas. His poetry was dedicated to Vidobha or Vithala, an incarnation of Vishnu which happens to be the Hindu god. He is well known for Abhangas. Abhangas are what? They are the devotional poetry, and he also emphasized on community based worship via spiritual melodies which are known as kirtanas. All of these can be important from the preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Bonda tribe. This can be once again important from the preliminary examination point of view. Who are they? They are a tribal group. Where do they stay? They stay in the Malkangiri district of the state of Odisha. There is one of the practices that exists in this particular tribe. What is it? It is called as Binimoy Prartha. This happens to be a Bata system that still continues to present as part of their culture. There is a festival that they practice called as Pangal festival, where the Bonda men move into the forest, go for the hunting purposes and don't return back until they have completed their hunting. Then we have their language which belongs to the Munda branch of Austro-Asiatic language, and finally when it comes to the society, it is the Bonda society women who enjoy the privileged position, and it is mostly matriarchal dominance that is seen in this part of the society. So remember, these important pointers can be important from the preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the next article. This article says No quota without quantifiable data. The article here is speaking about reservation in state of Tamil Nadu. We have discussed about this article in our Sunday CNA. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. India has failed to fully appreciate the usage of international law as a means to advance its national security interests. Do you agree? Justify. Project Sampurna's success in reducing child malnutrition is a model that can be easily implemented elsewhere. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.